Hello and welcome back to another episode of Fully Booked, the Hidden Gems author podcast, in which Craig Touch and myself, Roland, chat some of the interesting figures and leading lights of this crazy industry of writing and publishing. And today we're delighted to welcome a very special guest, Jessica Sorentino. What an elegant name there. Who's a publishing professional and author brand strategist. How are you doing today, Jessica? Thank you for joining us.
Hi, it's so great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, we're delighted to have you. And of course, we wouldn't be here without the man himself, Craig Touch, the owner and founder of Hidden Gems and an author himself. How are you doing today, Craig?
I'm doing well. Thanks, Roland, and thanks for joining us. This is one of those topics. So today we want to talk about sort of brand awareness, author brand, the sort of the marketing around yourself and not necessarily just about the one book that you have coming out today, because that's something that you're an expert in. You've worked for Simon & Schuster, for Macmillan. This is your bread and butter, and this is one of those topics that a lot of authors contact me about when I do consult calls and stuff like that, where that's what they're looking for. Is they're looking to create a brand and figure out how to market themselves holistically, rather than say just learn how to run a Facebook ad or what promotions they should do. And I think it's worth discussing as a whole of like why that is important for authors, because some authors don't ask that question because they don't even realize that is sort of kind of the goal for most authors, is to create a brand around themselves. So let's talk about that. Why don't you start off by telling us a bit about yourself and what you do, and we'll go from there.
Sure. And honestly, you just said so many important things that I could just dive straight into it. But to backtrack just a little and answer your question, I have worked at both Simon & Schuster and Macmillan. And I work one-on-one with authors and in a larger group setting in my community that I host on Substack. But what's so important and I'm a lifelong reader, and that will come up in a minute about why that's so important. But what's so important about what you just said is the reason. I'm glad that you're hearing a lot of authors asking about a brand when they're coming to you for consults, because marketing makes so much more sense. Marketing that one book or running that Facebook ad or, promoting that next title works so much better when people know who you are and when you already have a relationship with the people who you're hoping will become your readers. And that is exactly what a brand opens the door for you to be able to do.
Right. And so that relationship is something that you build through social media, through your newsletter, through Substack, right? Or how else do readers build it? Let's say you're a beginning reader and you are beginning writer, and you haven't yet done that. Where do you start?
So what I always recommend for my authors, and generally speaking, to do is start to position yourself as thinking about yourself as a business, and your book is the product. So the business has a brand, and you kind of know what brands stand for. So you have to determine what you stand for from this brand perspective. And typically it should be only about like 5-6 words. You don't want somebody to have to think of a laundry list when they think about you. They want to be able to say like, oh, that's Jessica. She's the person who loves to read thrillers, or whatever it might, be. So you want to figure out what your brand, your business stands for. And then think about each individual book that you have as a product that business needs to sell. And when you start to think about yourself from this perspective, from this business angle, it becomes a lot easier to put yourself out there, because you have a goal, and it sort of like eliminates a little of the emotional barrier that might come up from the fear of showing up or the fear of putting yourself out there. So if your brand is, I'm going to run with my thriller example. If your brand is thrillers, where are those readers hanging out? Where do thriller readers typically go to find their next book read? What are they talking about outside of the fact that they're reading a thriller? Because at the end of the day, everybody is a reader, not just the people who are posting about books. Reading is a hobby that is central to many people. So we don't want to just narrow down our focus to like what's going on in the book space, and really thinking about what does my business's audience need from me and where are they? And then that's where you start to figure out where you show up.
That's really interesting, because I am into men's adventure fiction, and I didn't realize that there is now like a whole men's adventure lifestyle thing on Instagram where men are like, wearing adventure gear and lighting bonfires and doing this and doing that. And the books that many of them publish is just part of that. So that's where the attention is. And if you are marketing that type of book, that would be kind of the community you want to be a part of, rather than just like marketing your book to everyone.
Exactly. And that's actually why so many creators get book deals. And I know that feels very frustrating for authors and writers who are like, I'm the writer and I want the book deal, but they gave it to the blogger, they gave it to the influencer. It's because they've already determined what their business is, and they have an audience who is ready to convert within that business. So at the end of the day, publishing is an industry that is operating as a business, of course. Like, we like to think it's a 90s rom-com, but it is a business. There are financial goals that need to be hit. There are tough decisions that need to be made. And at the end of the day, they're going to go with the people who they know that can help sell books.
Yeah. And it's frustrating to authors because a lot of authors are introverts and they're not out there building brands before they decide to write. They're like, hey, I want to be a writer. I don't want to talk to people. So, then you're saying, hey, go talk to people to be a writer. And it's like, wait a second. But yeah, that is one of those things that, we've talked about in the past, where the idea of, even when you're just doing social media or when you're sending out your newsletters, it's not always about, here's my new book, right? Because that isn't achieving that goal. That's just saying, here's every time I talk to you, I think of you as a consumer who's going to buy my product, and that's not building relationship, right? And that's when people start ignoring your posts. The tricky part is that whole thing about build that relationship, talk about more than just your book, which is exactly what you're saying. Go figure out where those thriller readers live and what are they talking about aside from I'm reading thrillers. And once you do that and you become part of that community, then yes, it becomes much, much more easy to sell into it, because it's not like, people aren't looking at you like just somebody who's just every time you open your mouth is set to say, here's my new book.
Oh, for sure. It actually, it's a nice reminder. I said it to somebody like this recently, and they were like, okay, now that felt like a personal attack and it hit home. I said, when you just show up to tell people to buy your book, and then you go dark, and then you wait until you have your next book to go out and to buy, and it's just urgency, and you feel that sort of desperation seeping through, you have become the digital version of the friend who only calls when they need something. And they were like, oh my gosh, why'd you say it like that? I'm like, well, did it work? Like, I don't know what to tell you, but no one likes that. And no one wants, they will support you if they can, and if they have the bandwidth or the availability, or if maybe they're going to the airport and they don't know what to bring in their bag next to read. But, if you start marketing 3 months, 6 months out before your book is ready to be the thing that you ask people to purchase, and you've already built that relationship, and you give yourself a little bit of a runway to not just promote it from like the traditional standpoint of tropes and themes and character introductions, but enter conversations with people who are having conversations around the themes that take place in your book. So pulling out threads from your story, bringing that story to life, even if it's in a comment on somebody else's content. You don't always have to be the organic poster. You can participate in conversations that already exist. It starts to link you with certain stories. It starts to link you with certain curiosities. People will start to research you. And if we go back to what we talked about briefly up front with ads and stuff, if you start running ads and you don't have anything organic, or you don't have solid branding in place prior, when people click that ad to do their due diligence and make sure what the ad is running for is aligned with the truth of the real product, but they don't see anything, or they don't see anything that's aligned with that ad that's coming from you yourself, you've lost their trust. So you always want to do branding prior to running any sort of marketing or ads.
I think that's such good advice. I hope everyone's listening to that.
Yeah, and I mean,
you.
it's like with a Facebook ad, it's connected to your page, your author page, and if there's nothing on your author page, it doesn't mean nobody's going to buy it, but the people that are like, who is this author? Is this somebody who has ever written before? Or do people like what they read? I mean, you can see some of that on their product page, but if it's a brand new book and it doesn't have reviews and you're a first time author, but if you've connected and you've created this product page and people have started, following you because you talk about things related to that subject, that gives you that starting point. So,
absolutely. And I think to go off of that too, so many authors have taken the route of just sharing what it means to be an author, or sharing what it means to be a writer, or how they got their book deal and everything. And that's very clickbaity right now. People are very interested in that right now because there's so much noise. But if you're just talking about your writing journey, you're not building any relationship with the reader in the book. And if you could transform yourself into your dream reader and promote yourself from that angle, it's going to be such a difference in the way that you show up and talk about this book, because you wouldn't tell a fellow thriller reader, like I wouldn't tell one of my reading buddies, oh my gosh, let me read you the back copy description of this book because I know you'll like it. I will summarize it from an excitement standpoint. I will say this is the part of it that I think would really stand out for you. You love characters that are about, this. And that is what makes people excited to read a book. So if your author page is empty, or if it only has tips for being the next best writer, there's too many other books out there, and there are too many other people talking about the excitement of stories that a reader is going to stop researching you, and they're going to find something a little bit easier to get their hands on. So you really want to make it easy for yourself. If you go back to that, I'm a business and this is a product mindset, your consumer wants ease, and your reader is a consumer at the end of the day in this case. So make it easy for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the tricky part with that for a lot of readers is trying to figure out what it is that will set them apart, that they can talk about that isn't, directly tied to the book itself. I know we've talked about this in the past with Roland. He would, on his, Instagram, he was posting pictures of motorcycles every time he went by a motorcycle, because he was writing, about his romance books were about motorcycles and motorcycle gangs, right? So it did create that sort of organic group of people that sort of like that sort of thing. Now, not I mean, he might have got a lot of bikers.
I think people weren't reading my books for the motorcycles specifically.
Right. But that might not have given him the best audience that he needed. But it's coming up with that. I think that is the tricky part for some authors. How to start that conversation and what to talk about. What is going to bring people in there? So, do you have any thoughts specifically around that?
I do. And I love that you were sharing motorcycles in order to market your book. That's really fantastic. I think yes, I do have advice for that, but there is something else I just want to flag very quickly is when we're talking about branding, we're talking about you as the author, and the marketing is of your book itself. So we want to make sure that even if we are adding components from our book into our brand, so to speak, they are more campaign oriented, like what it's sounding like you did with motorcycles for your book. It doesn't mean motorcycles are inherent to you and your business and your brand, but it worked for that particular campaign. So that's something I always want authors to know, is that there is, that room to evolve, and there is that room to hyperfixate on certain storylines when it comes to the campaign of marketing your book. But as far as finding out what to start sharing and what types of conversations to start having as a brand goes, there's an exercise I do with everybody I work with, and I talk about it. It's like the hill I'll die on. It's all I talk about, is I have everybody visualize what it would be like to have just come home from a coffee date or any sort of lunch, food, whatever date with their dream reader, and talk about, like, journal essentially what that conversation was about. Since I'm working with writers, and everyone who's listening to this is a writer, the writing part of this process is not the difficult part. It is the piece that comes after. So it's, you just sat down, you just had this great chat with somebody who would be your perfect reader, the person who you really want to read your book. It represents all of the people in the world that would walk into a bookstore and love to pick yours up off the shelf. And what ends up coming out of that visualization recap is common grounds that you and your dream reader connected over. Because 9 times out of 10, you don't sit down and say, hey, buy my book, which is the equivalent of opening up Instagram, and the first thing you're doing is posting, my book is live, So it really helps switch that mindset a little bit to be like, what did I talk to this person about? Where did we find that common ground? Even if it's a healthy debate, even if it's something totally arbitrary, you do this exercise once or twice to just make sure you're getting all your different audience members. I do it whenever I'm feeling stuck also. And then you sort of highlight the things that you do feel you can bring to your social platform or bring into your regular everyday conversation. So if you both bonded over loving to cook, let's just say, there's nothing that says that can't become part of your personal brand, right? If you and your dream reader are bonding over cooking, I don't know if it relates to your book, but it might relate to your brand. And then when your book comes out, is there maybe a recipe in the book that you can share? Or maybe it's that, every character you do like a menu and every character went to a dinner and like, this is everything that they ordered, So there are then ways to tie the marketing component to the things that you and your readers are already bonding over in real time.
Oh, I like that. I remember when I wrote one of my books and had a cocktail in the book, it was a very lowbrow cocktail. It was like cheap white rum and orange juice in a tin cup with a wrench to stir it. And I made that and did it on my Facebook. And I see what you mean. If you could get elements from that and turn them into real world things, that would be something that might appeal to people.
Yes. And you also want to make sure that's a perfect example, because you also want to make sure it's something you can do in real time. If you've both bonded over one trip to Italy that happened 5 years ago and you have no plans on going back to Italy anytime soon to talk about that and create more content around that or introduce that storyline, you're setting yourself up for that stress and that urgency of, I don't know what to post. I don't know what to share. I don't know how to connect. So yes, you can talk about things like that, but you also want to make sure you're talking about things and connecting over things that are easy for you in your everyday life to be a part of. If you bonded, a few authors that I've done this with have bonded over the style of writing, whether it's writing in the morning or writing while the kids are in school. So that's an easy conversation to have, especially in smaller places like Instagram stories or Substack notes or X, where you can say like, oh, the kids went off to school. It's finally time for me to get my, my pages in or whatever. And you get to pull it in different ways. So once my authors have those themes lined up, then it's my job to help determine how they enter the world and make sure that is the glue that holds them together no matter where they're showing up.
Yeah, I wonder if it's maybe easier for nonfiction authors to figure out their brand and connection to their readers than it is for a genre writer. Like if you're writing fantasy or thrillers, it's one thing to talk about your thriller author is a chef, how does that really tie into, start talking cooking. I know like Roland's got a lot of friends that are in the James Bond universe, and some of them write books about James Bond. So that's sort of an easy tie-in, right? They get involved in those James Bond forums and they get known in that sort of universe. And then when they have a book, that's an easy sell, right? But I think maybe it's a little trickier for some of the genre authors, you think?
I think it's definitely easier for nonfiction because you're teaching something, and I've always said, a nonfiction book can lean more towards a need, whereas a fiction book is typically a want, and that brings with it its own set of different priorities because you have to make somebody want something and turn it into a need for them. But with fiction, I actually think it's a lot more fun because you can invite people into a world that you've imagined and created. So this is where I think that publishing can really benefit from starting to think outside of the box. And if the houses don't have the bandwidth for that, that's where the authors really get to step in and have creative control with, again, we've already said that readers are everywhere. They're not just the people who are on Bookstagram and Book Talk and talking about books 24/7 on Goodreads. Readers are your barista at your local coffee shop. They are your grandma in her nursing home. Like, a reader spans all over the world, all over the demographics. There's no one that can't be a reader unless they didn't want to. So really starting to get creative with thinking outside of the box. Everyone's posting their tropes. You can post your tropes, but maybe you do it on a scroll if you're a fantasy writer. Maybe it's not that typical graphic that's got the squiggly line arrows and your book cover on it. Maybe it's you at the Renaissance Fair unraveling a scroll of all of the themes that are coming up in your book and in your world that you've created. Maybe it's, all of your book talks are not in bookstores. Maybe they're in taverns if that's central to your storytelling, So there's also this whole thing where, like, it becomes very repetitive. So I like to work with authors on the people they know. Like, who do you know that's cool and different, that's also a reader and can help you reach new people in different ways, where, again, it doesn't have to go viral. It doesn't have to be social media popular, but interesting things typically make it to social media, which helps in a different way. But when you start to lean into the themes in your book and the themes of how you connect with your readers, it becomes a lot more fun than just like, let me give you a list of my characters or the list of the things that you can learn when you read my book.
Yeah, we had an author on, J.D. Barker. He was on last month, and one of the things that he did was he had written, I guess I can't remember if it was a horror or a thriller, but it was based in a haunted house that was like a real place that is known to be haunted or whatever. And for his marketing, he gave away a night's stay at this haunted house. And it was a promotion, right? But it was tied very directly with his book, and it was something people hadn't done before. And he put out press releases and all that, and he got lots of publicity from people that wanted to win that, of course, but also just that was like free promotion of his book. So that idea of thinking outside the box and about what ties your specific book into that marketing, that is always stuck with me as a great example of that. It's just figuring out what that is. It's the tricky part.
Absolutely. I actually listened to that episode in preparation for this, and it was a really great conversation. I love that example. And I did something very similar when I was at Macmillan, and we were releasing a new edition of Sleepy Hollow for the anniversary year of the book's publication a few years ago. And I organized it so that the launch party took place at the Sleepy Hollow Cemetery. And the announcement of the book was so cool. And the announcement of the book was in front of Washington Irving's grave with the headless horse. They have an actual headless horseman who rides through. So we hired him to come through, and all of the baked goods that were there came from a Sleepy Hollow bakery. So we kept it really within like the Sleepy Hollow community, as well as the original artwork by the artist. We had that turned into the top of a cake. And then I made the inside of the cake red velvet. So when you cut it, it was red and more blood-like, So I like to call all these examples, like what JD did, what I'm talking about, I like to call that story immersive marketing, where you're really inviting people into the story versus talking about the fact that you wrote a book. So I think just saying it like that too, you can tell there's a little bit of a difference there. And if you do have a book where a location is central, it does make it a little bit easier. I know a historical fiction author who all of her books take place in Manhattan, in different historical landmarks. And now there are actual New York City tours, like walking tours, where you can go to all of the landmarks of her different books, So if a location is tied, it does definitely make it a little bit easier. If there's something like a recipe, like you were talking about, Roland, that does make it a little bit easier. But, every author I work with, at least I do read their books, and I do help them pull those components out, just because it's a lot easier to do branding and marketing when you kind of, have all of the information and know what you're working with. So.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So, those are some good ones. So then what's next after you've sort of figured out your business and your brand, and you're writing more than one book. I guess it's really just a matter of, continuing to build, trying to expand your reach. With each book, you're growing that audience. Are there different key things that people need to sort of keep aware of as this process is going along, or is it just kind of rinse and repeat, more of the same, just a little bit different, like for the specific book that you're doing?
I think it's a little rinse and repeat-esque in the sense where, like, once you start to flex that muscle and you know how to put yourself out there and you know how to represent yourself, it becomes a little bit easier to continue to do so. My hope is once you do it for one book and you see the numbers changing a little bit, it inspires you to keep going, because the longer the runway that you give yourself, as we said earlier, just the better off you'll be. So if maybe for book one, you gave yourself 3 months, maybe for book two, you sort of never took your foot off the pedal from book one. And, you kept up with that relationship building and you kept up with that community interaction and engagement. So then you've got such a long runway for book two, and it really does start to compound. But a rule of thumb that I always have is give something 3 months minimum before you make any changes. So if let's just say you went heavy on Instagram for book one and you're not sure if it worked, or you're like, I just posted 3 things and no one's paying attention, blah, blah, blah. Do not change the plan. Do not edit what you're doing. Don't get cold feet. Give yourself a solid 3 months, because that'll give you 90 whole days of research, analytics, and insight to what, something that you may have thought didn't do great because of like count or comments or anything. Maybe on the back end, you can see how many new people it brought over from a visibility standpoint, and if that's the case, then for the next 3 months, we might lean more heavily into content like that to continue to expand the reach. So really getting clear on what your metrics are, understanding that your metrics in a campaign for a launch are different than your metrics for in between books, so to speak, when you're, sort of just showing up and nurturing a community. Those are 2 very different metrics you're probably looking for at that moment. And then doing the best you can to hit both of those in both periods. You want to stay creative. You want to remember that you're allowed to feel emotion. This is a big one for me right now, where I feel so many people have, they've put branding so front and center that they forget that they're allowed to take the blinders off, like if the tone of your brand is dark and mysterious and everything, like they forget that they also can't celebrate their book release. It's like, you're still allowed to say, yay, I published a book, even if it's a dark and twisty book, So just remembering that you are a human being and these are human brands. And even though they are businesses, people connect to people and readers sell books the best. So you want to make sure you have that humanity in there. And then the final piece to this question, my answer to this question, is don't stop promoting your book, because 80% of book sales come from the back end. So that new release window, I like to just say that, your launch day is not the end of the goal of getting your book into the world. It's actually the first day that your book is available for other people. So think of that more as day one and not the end of a journey. And when you think about it like that, it gives you the opportunity to continue talking about it, showing it in different people's bags, giving it away, promoting it to bookstores, calling libraries, having events with readers who've had the chance to read the book, versus just your launch tour where people are being introduced to your book. So there's different ways to, keep the ball moving forward.
Yeah, what you said about tracking and measurement, I think, is so important, and I think it would be great if there was a tool where you could track when you do promotions and the effect it has on your book sales and things, because they always say you can't approve anything you can't measure, and being able to link those two, that's really where the magic happens, I think.
Totally, and there are so many things that you can't measure with books because they are such a word of mouth business. So you're going to do the best you can to measure online, and it'll give you good feedback for how to maintain an online presence in a way that actually feels good for you and for the people you're trying to reach. But you really can't measure if, I bought the book and then passed it to someone who passed it to someone who passed it to someone for the next 10 years. You can't measure that. So you just have to be present in case someone, you want to have an email address, you want to have a contact form, You want to have every option available for that reader who loves your work to be able to connect with you and say, thank you for putting this book in the world.
And what sort of metrics do you find are useful that authors can track, and how would they track them, and what specifically can they do with those metrics, and to look at them to say, what's working, what isn't?
I definitely don't like to put such a heavy pressure on metrics because each app platform uses something different. But if you are running a campaign for marketing does have ROI, so a return on investment attached to it, which means that there are metrics and milestones that you're striving to hit within that campaign. So that's sort of like the metric I would look at for success. So if, for example, we're talking about your book tour and you want to have 5 stops, each having 20 seats, butts in each seat, a book sold for each of those, to me, the success would be that being done. You've hit your stops, you've sold your books, you've had the engagement of the community. Beautiful. If you want to run a virtual campaign where you are reaching people via social media, this is where you just have to get really clear on your goals. So are you looking to do collaborative posts? Are you looking to get into a book club? Are you looking to get on podcasts? Like, how can you reach the readers who will help you reach those goals? And I also think that when you are operating from a goal-based metric perspective, it's exciting to share those goals with your community, because the more they get to know you, the more they're going to want to help you reach those goals. So if you're like, we're 50 pages shy of our X amount of numbers pages read, somebody out there is going to be like, okay, it's a 250 page book. I could do it. I could get them over the finish line, and it becomes a community effort. It's exciting. People get curious. They're like, what's all this excitement about? And they want to join in too. So I think short answer there is I would more like to see you dig in on your very specific goals with numbers attached to them, and then measure your success on how you achieved those. And the best way to do that is, again, by thinking out of the box and being like, who can help me here? What can I do differently? How can I make my name splash a little bit in a way that maybe it hasn't done yet before?
Right. So, I mean, if they have those goals, I'm doing this podcast and I'm hoping to get, X amount of sales through it. The only way to really look at that, to track whether you're successful, though, is, pull up your KDP report and say, okay, this is how many sales I did, or here's where my rank was. Then I went on the podcast, and did the needle move at all?
Yes. And you can also ask, you can, as long as you're directing people into, this is something we haven't covered yet, but you always want to be directing people to your email list, because you own that. And, this is not author specific. This is industry, this is for everybody in every industry. Your email list is the only thing you actually own on the internet, like your website and your email list. So if Instagram died tomorrow, your millions of followers that you may have been striving to achieve and gain would disappear with them. So you want to make sure you're bringing everyone over to your email list with, you can give them free chapters, or, previews, or maybe exclusive cover reveals, things that make them feel excited to be there with you. But in answer to this question, yes, if you're bringing everybody over to your email and they're on your social media platforms and everything, it never hurts to say, where'd you find my book? Who introduced you? And then sometimes it can even be a survey where it can say, from this podcast, from this interview, from this event, that way you're spinning the wheels and letting them say, oh yeah, it was from here, or it was from here. Sometimes they might just be like, I don't know, a friend told me about it. But if you get specific with what you're looking for, they'll be specific back. You basically have to train people to understand what you're looking for sometimes. So that doesn't hurt to do. It doesn't hurt to remember that you have to say something a lot of times for it to stick. So if you are on a podcast and being on that podcast is meant to help you sell books, you cannot share that podcast one time and be like, hey guys, guess what? I was on podcast. And then share the link once and then never talk about it again. You need clips. You need to say it 12 more times. You need to just continue to share that podcast and different angles of it, be like, we talked about what it was like writing in the dark because of the storm, at moment 32 or whatever. And then let people be curious and let people come in and be a part of it. in that capacity. So in order to reach your goals, you just have to sort of be a little bit blind to embarrassment and put yourself out there and not be ashamed to ask people, how did it work? How do you think I did? Where'd you find me?
It got brought up the last time we had a podcast, but my background is in advertising, and way back in the day, we used to talk about the 7 touches, which sounds so sketchy now. But then if you want somebody to take action on something, you have to hit them with your marketing message 7 times. And, in the old days, it was maybe they heard your radio ad, and then they saw your billboard in Times Square, and then they saw your advert in the paper, and each one of those was a touch. These days, it could be, they saw a Facebook post, they saw your Instagram post, they saw your Twitter post, then they got your email, and you still have the opportunity to hit them 7 times. And so you're right, I guess being shy and embarrassed and not wanting to cringe by posting yourself all the time is detrimental to that goal.
Exactly. And I forgot that it was called the 7 touches. That was a good throwback. The number is actually up to 12 now, which is crazy. But when you think about it, we are being inundated so much with information that I think some of that comes from just, in one ear, out the other, like out of sight, out of mind. And the other is just not knowing what to trust. If you think about when you Google something and you have all these different answers come up, you're typically going to search through to find the answer that populates the most, right? And so that's a very tangible example of needing to see something a bunch of times before you believe that to be the truth. Whether or not it is the truth, you're just looking for the thing that has the most credibility behind it, which also goes back to when you're running ads, you want to make sure you've got that organic content to back up what the ads is showing you. But I do love Instagram stories for this exact reason, because, I have an author right now who has a book coming out in September, and pre-order just opened. And for her publisher, ebooks are a really big deal, and pages read through KDP is a really big deal. So the ebook launches before the paperback does. And every single day, I was like, you can set an alarm for it to be at the exact same time every day if you want, because stories expire every 24 hours. So I'm like, have a few different designs ready where it just says ebook available, add the link in once a day. You just repost that. It's nice and easy. It's saved to your camera roll. It's memorable, because not everybody's going to see it every single day, but they're never going to see it twice if it goes up every 24 hours. So you don't have to feel like you're spamming somebody, but it's just always available to be seen, remembered, and acted upon if it goes up daily on a stories type of format. So it's a good way to get those touches in, if you will.
Get your touches in, like get your steps in.
Yeah, I always that one has always, I guess, made me, I feel conflicted on that one. I understand why it works. But I know, like, from everybody's different. And like, for me, it's like, I get annoyed if I see the same thing over and over again. But I do see how other people need to see it more than once to get it. And I know that has worked on me too, where, if I want to buy something that I've never bought before, I'm going to think of a brand I'm familiar with, and I'm familiar with it because I've probably seen the ad a million times, right? So I get it, right? But I always felt like, okay, if I keep talking to the same thing all the time, like, it's just going to be kind of annoying. And I guess that's one of the things people look at with their ad, the frequency number. It starts to creep up. They're like, oh, it's been shown to people too many times, and it needs to be pulled or whatever. But in reality, maybe it just needs to be tweaked or changed so that the message is the same, but it's shown differently and not sort of like as annoying, right? So yeah, for me, there's that fine line on that. I 100% understand why it works, but I see the danger of too much repetition for some people.
I will be honest with you, I'm the exact same way. I get so frustrated. I get so frustrated by it, but that's like the whole, when a doctor needs a doctor kind of thing, where a doctor needs surgery, where you're just like, the back end of it. And so you're like, oh my God, I know what they're doing. And it's hard to see it from an outsider looking in. But I will say, I recently spoke to somebody on my team about how I'm doing this podcast tour right now where I'm just, enhancing my visibility. That's the goal of my campaign right now, is enhancing my visibility and talking to all of the beautiful people in all of these different communities. And I said, I was like, I'm afraid that I'm going to say the same things over and over, and it's going to get old and boring and everything. And because, to be fair, I do the same thing every single day with different people, just from different perspectives. So there's only so many times you can shift the message. And she actually reframed it to me, because she said that for a lot of people, she's like, especially for her, when there's somebody that she feels she can learn from, she actually tunes into all of the different appearances to hear them say the same thing over and over, because depending on the way the question was asked, based on the show you're on, you will say the same thing, but it will come out a little bit differently. And she's like, I like hearing the same message over and over, because it's showing me that it's something I can actually do. It's not something I have to change every single time I need to, work on that one particular thing. So that felt good from a communications standpoint reminder. And I think the way that you can apply that to like digital and visual touch points is, don't do them back to back. Like if you are going to put up an Instagram story every day reminding people your book is on sale, that, for the love of God, cannot be the only thing you're sharing. Have things in between, have different things that are unrelated to the book, that are just more related to your brand or your life and everything. Let that be the reminder, even if it's, your morning coffee for some of them, where it's a picture of your morning coffee and the reminder. It doesn't always have to be that perfectly curated graphic with the link in bio sticker and everything else. It's, switch it up, let it be a part of your real life. And that's kind of like what I love about personal branding so much, is that you get to show your life as part of these connection pieces and tell your story on top of it. So that helps with, both pieces of it. It's almost like you're the founder and the business all at once. And you can decide when you want to like really step into the business shoes and share the graphic, or you want to be the founder and be like, I wrote this book and it's available for you to read today. So.
Right. Well, it definitely makes sense from a podcast perspective when, you're talking about the same thing, but in a different way. And that might hit people, what you talk about, even though it's the same topic, you talk about it with one person who asks the question in one way or frames it in one way. And, when the same person watches it, one of those ways may connect with them much more strongly than one of the other ways. And so that totally makes sense. I'm thinking more of like, that same ad that's been run for a month now, and the same Facebook user has seen that ad over and over again. It's like, oh, do you ever work with authors creating ads and doing other branding like this, in terms of, coming up with all the ideas, or are you sort of like more giving the advice and then letting them go forward and do it?
Both. I do have one co-author team who has an actual like social media team and an ads person on that team. And it's honestly such a pleasure to collaborate with everybody, because I'm such an ideas person. I'm like, oh my God, we have to do this newsletter campaign. That's this, and this. And then the author is paralyzed. They're like, when, like how, when, what, why. And the fact that these two have a team that's like, okay, like just, give us the bullet points and we'll put that into action. It's just really, really, it's really cool. Same thing with their ads, where we'll talk about what are different comps that they could put in the ads titles and everything else that'll just sort of get to test. And it's really cool to see the A/B testing of the ads from the back end. I don't run ads like professionally. I don't know how to do that. So working with them and seeing how that works has been a really cool experience for me too, to learn something new, and the way that ads and organic interact with one another in a way that is less theoretical and more tangible. But then I do have authors too who I'll step in if necessary, if they're having a hard time with conceptually bringing something to life, or we'll go through all of the ideas together and conversation starters. And oftentimes they will send me their content before it goes live and say like, is this kind of what you were thinking when we had this conversation? Or like, what advice do you have to make this better or stronger and everything? And so it is a very, very collaborative process. I'm just hands off with the design, so to speak.
Organic and advertising work so well together. People like always focus on the advertising first, but it's kind of like if you put out a lot of organic content and some of it works really well or maybe goes viral, then that's what you should be using as the content for your ads. I mean, it's
exactly.
Yeah,
I like to say that too. Even they'll be like, should we just boost this post? But and I think that, you know, boosting ads, all of it, like let organic to tell you what's working. If a post is organically doing well, then yes, put some money behind it. If your audience is already responding well to it, then sure, find more people who are like those people and bring them in. But you know, if you, again, going back to that tropes post that everyone does, which is very helpful, just a little tired now that you can be more creative with it. I don't want to see that boosted. You don't boost that to me. That's not an ad to me. You know, like there's better things that you can spend your ad spend on, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Now, unfortunately, it looks like we are approaching the top of the hour, so we're going to start wrapping things up. My first question was, Craig, do you have any other questions for Jessica?
No, listen, this has been absolutely fascinating. I could pick your brain about this sort of thing for at least another hour. So thanks for coming on and talking to us about everything you do, because this is so important. And it really is, unfortunately, one of those areas that a lot of authors struggle with because they just want to write. And with self-publishing, you got to do everything. And luckily, when you say you have to do everything, it doesn't literally mean you have to do everything. It just means you're in charge of all those things. You don't have a publisher watching out for you and telling you what to do, but you can still, just knowing what you have to do is the important thing, because then you can contact people like yourself to help with it. So thanks again for coming on and talking to us about it.
Thank you for having me. And if I could just tell everybody one thing very quickly is, don't let this overwhelm you, because at the end of the day, it's about connecting with your readers, and it's a hump to get over. But instead of thinking of it as something that you have to do, or that your publisher didn't do, or that your publicist can't do, it's something that you get to do. You get to be the person who has a conversation with their readers and builds a relationship around this amazing world and story that you got to bring into the world. So it kind of changes the mindset a little bit.
I love that. Now, for everyone who has loved everything you've had to say, where can they find out more about you, where they can find out your website? Point them in the right direction.
So my website is my name. It's jessicasorentino.com. And most of our business marketing and opportunities live on our Substack, which is called Open Book. But that domain is also jessicasorentino.substack.com. But you can find everything you need in those two places.
Well, fantastic. We will make sure to pop a link to that down in the description of this video. So whether you are listening on Spotify or watching on YouTube, make sure you scroll down, click on that link, and check out everything Jessica has to offer. And while you're down there, you will pass that big empty comment section. So make sure you leave Jessica a comment. Let her know how much you've appreciated everything she shared with us today. And while you're down there, you know, there's a subscribe button if you haven't already. There is that like button you should smash. And there's a little bell icon that you can click to get notified every time there is a new episode of Fully Booked, which of course there will be next week. So until then, Jessica, thank you so much for being our guest. We appreciated everything you shared with us today, and we will see you next week. Cheerio.